Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you. We have obviously had an eventful 24 hours as a country and certainly as a province, and I expect that uncertainty and continued announcements from the president will continue. I did want to say that I am glad to see a shift in how the president's talking about Canada, how he's talking about our prime minister. And I'm hopeful that this new constructive relationship that appears to be evolving between the prime minister and the president means some stability and ultimately grounds to sit down like adults and come to agreement on how our two countries can work together to increase prosperity for everyone. British Columbia stands together with Canadians across the country that are affected by the president's tariffs. And particularly, I think about people who work in the automotive sector, and particularly in Ontario right now, are already facing layoffs. As well as we stand with the Americans who work at automotive plants that are also seeing layoffs today. These tariffs are a terrible policy. So American families are going to see dramatic increases in literally everything that they buy at the store in terms of the cost that was already too high for so many families. And as they face layoffs and see the contraction of their economy and the stock market continue to drop, one of the messages that we have for the American people, and that I know British Columbians, we all carry this in our hearts, is we do better together. And we supported each other for many, many years. And bad decisions out of the White House by one person do not affect that relationship that we have with Americans, and vice versa. I will be meeting with the Prime Minister in the coming days. He's going to be coming out to British Columbia. I look forward to that visit to talk about the issues that we're facing here, particularly in our softwood sector. Tomorrow, I'll be in Prince George meeting with forest industry representatives. My concern is that the president has committed to targeting our softwood lumber industry even more than the Americans already have with their unfair duties on our products. It's going to drive up the cost of housing in the States. It's going to cost jobs south of the border and in British Columbia. And we're going to stand together with those workers in that sector to make sure that they're supported, as well as with that industry to make sure that, that we get through this. And part of the effort will be around diversification to other markets. And part of it will be about supporting industry and workers directly with programs to facilitate them moving into products and diversification across Canada that will enable us to head off some of the worst impacts of these tariffs. With that, I'd like to open it up for questions and look forward to the discussion we're about to have.
Good afternoon. A reminder to media on the line to press *1 to enter the queue. We will start with questions on the ground. We have Global News, Richard Zisman.
Premier, are you largely optimistic that the forestry sector, the natural gas sector has dodged a bullet here from what we saw yesterday? And can you talk to us about what was discussed this morning on BC's behalf when meeting with the Prime Minister? And we just learned you're going to see him next week. You know, what should people read into this meeting with the PM? You met with Jagmeet Singh as well this week. What should people read into this conversation that you'll be having with the Prime Minister next week?
Well, I think like all British Columbians and frankly, like all Canadians, you'd get whiplash if you followed the president's every announcement as a source of direction. So the feeling that we have today, okay, well, it's not as bad as what some other countries are facing right now, is tempered by two things. One is the fact that what we're already facing is quite devastating for many sectors in British Columbia, including our softwood sector, our aluminum producers, and other tariffs that affect our seafood producers that are coming from China as collateral damage in this increasingly global trade war. And the other thing that tempers any kind of feeling of relief, for me anyway, is the fact that 2 hours from now on Truth Social, the president's going to put up another tweet about whatever, and undo any sort of sense of security that we might have that he's going to wait until after the election and negotiate an agreement like Canada and the U.S. always have done. So that that was I had a two-part message for the Prime Minister this morning. One was to congratulate him on what appears to be a de-escalation for now with the president. I'm grateful for that. And the second is that we can't trust it. We need to work with our allies internationally. The president has attacked the entire world at the same time. And this does create an opportunity for us to deepen our relationship, to deepen our trading relationship, our security relationship with countries that value fair trade, with countries that value democracy, and that share our values as Canadians. And so when the Prime Minister comes to visit, we're going to continue that conversation. But also it's important for the Prime Minister to understand the unique impacts of the President's actions on British Columbia. The risk always with Prime Ministers and with federal parties is to get trapped in Ontario. They're in Ontario all the time. They're in Ottawa. They're beside Quebec, literally just over a bridge, and they forget about the West. And so my message to the Prime Minister will be that you have to be on top of issues in Western Canada and in British Columbia, and your response, whether to support workers or industries or whatever it is, needs to include British Columbia. So I'm glad he's coming, and I look forward to our visit.
Back to Richard for a follow-up.
On that point, Preston Manning wrote an op-ed that was published today calling for greater conversation in this country about, in essence, what would be Western separation. He says the movement has grown out of Alberta and Saskatchewan, but there could be a sense of that in British Columbia and Manitoba. Do you feel any of that sense of isolationism here in BC and a detachment away from what's happening in the rest of the country?
Yeah, I saw that op-ed. To say that I was deeply disappointed in a moment of national unity when premiers, regardless of political stripe, are reaching out across the country to work together, that Canadians are joining hands. I've never seen the level of Canadian patriotism in British Columbia that I've seen right now, or even from Canadians. It's so inspiring. We're all singing the national anthem loud. We're buying Canadian products. To have an op-ed at this moment that says that the path forward is to break up the country, which is what he said, is completely bizarre. It reflects the perspective of an MLA in our own legislature who approvingly tweeted out a graphic showing Western Canada separation, that he advocated we should become a protectorate of the United States, the MLA for Shuswap Salmon Arm. I just can't fathom that mindset. In this moment when we're all coming together to try to rip the country apart, drive divisions, we need to stick together to be successful as Canadians. If we're going to stand on our own 2 feet, we got to stand together. And I hope that Mr. Manning reconsiders his reintroduction into Canadian political life with this particular proposal. I hope that MLA from Shuswap reconsiders his advocacy for us to become a protectorate of the United States. We're not Guam. We are a proud, amazing province. We are a proud, amazing country, and we're going to stand on our own 2 feet, and we're going to grow our economy, and we will do it not despite the United States, but in fact because it's something we should have done a long time ago.
Next, we'll take a question from Rob Shaw, Check News.
Premier, with 2 credit rating downgrades, to what extent is our poor financial situation as a province affecting your ability to respond to the tariffs and the province's ability to respond to weather the sort of economic global roller coaster that we're seeing now in response to yesterday?
Yeah, I've noted the concerns of these credit rating agencies, which are concerns that I share. You know, the impact of the tariffs on British Columbia, the impact of federal immigration policy swings from one extreme to another on our economy here in British Columbia. I mean, it's just one example. You know, our provincial nominee program, this is the province's program where we can sponsor Canadian citizens, was cut to about 40% of what it normally is. The impact of this is at a moment when American leading business people, researchers, investors and key workers with skills that we desperately need, from medicine to construction, are looking for somewhere to go, we're unable to offer them a space here right now. That affects our economy's ability to grow. That affects our ability to be prosperous here in the province. And it's rightly noted as a headwind for us by these credit rating agencies. The other piece is we have a significant deficit. We have committed to protect frontline services for British Columbians, to build hospitals, to build schools. We're doing that work. We need that to be strong in British Columbia. And also, we need a path to return to balance. That's why the finance minister has been doing the work. And we're doing a review of all of our programs to reduce spending in the provincial government on administration, on things that don't deliver those frontline services, on old programs that no longer meet the moment, and ensure that we're using every tax dollar wisely. We are financially in one of the best positions in Canada in terms of provinces, in terms of our debt to GDP ratio, in terms of our unemployment rate, in terms of our economic growth. But there are significant headwinds that we face here in BC. Fortunately, they are less than the headwinds faced by some other provinces. But I take little comfort from that because the tariffs could be quite devastating here.
Follow-up question for Rob Shaw.
The federal NDP today proposed the return of victory bonds to help governments raise money they could use to fight the American tariffs. I haven't seen those since the Second World War. You use a lot of wartime metaphors. Do you see any value? Is there any provincial interest in, whipping up the patriotism people feel to give the province money for promised returns that help you in the financial situation you're in now weather the economic storm?
Well, I know that British Columbians are looking for ways that they can send a message, that they can participate in ensuring that we're standing up to the United States, particularly the president, that we're supporting BC business. There are all kinds of ways that British Columbians can do that. For those that are wealthier, they can invest in supporting and growing BC businesses. And right now, a lot of businesses need that capital support because some of the banks are saying, look, we're not going to lend right now until we know where all this tariff stuff is going to end. You can buy, just in terms of your daily actions, and I know so many British Columbians are, as I see it in action, I talk to people at the grocery store. They're buying Canadian, they're buying BC products, they're supporting BC firms, and we've got a bill that just passed second reading in the legislature. Government's doing the same thing. In terms of issuing bonds, victory bonds or anything else, one of the areas that we are looking at in terms of asking British Columbians to support to deal with challenges that we face is around housing. We have a very innovative, affordable middle-income housing program in Vancouver involving about 1,800 units where there's a second mortgage held by the provincial government to make the units more affordable to first-time homebuyers and to homebuyers that might not otherwise be able to get into the market. And once we prove out that model, we'll be looking to foundations and other investors who are interested in helping British Columbia respond to the housing crisis, earn a return, much like what a victory bond would be, but it's not related to the tariffs, it's related to affordable housing.
Next, we have a question from Katie DeRosa, CBC.
Premier, with BC really not having significant tariffs imposed by the U.S., the Conservatives are saying we don't need Bill 7. Do you agree with that? And why have the hypothetical charge on U.S. trucks if we don't foresee that happening?
So it's, the Conservatives have never been in favor of Bill 7. Bill 7 does three things. One, it liberalizes trade across the country. It is the most aggressive legislation introduced yet by a province in Canada to get rid of internal trade barriers. We're at the front of that fight. We want BC businesses to trade across Canada. We want British Columbians to access goods from other provinces without restriction. The second thing it does is buy BC for government, buy Canadian, buy anything but American. It ensures that we are responding to, just like families are at home, that government is using tax dollars to support Canadian businesses first. And the third piece is this ability for us to put a charge on trucks going from Washington State to Alaska. And I know that is an aggressive thing. It's not something that we want to use, but we want to ensure that those Republican politicians in Alaska are plugged into the reality that I know they are, but that they have an extra motivation to speak out to the president, to stand up strong and say these tariffs are not a good idea. And it's not because we don't like Alaskans. In fact, we like them very much. They're friends and family, and we've worked together on projects of national significance, including the Alaska Highway, and we're going to continue to do that work. But if you don't have the tools to respond to a bully. If you don't stand up to the bully, then the bully only comes back for more. And the bully is not the people of Alaska. It's not the people of the United States. It's the president of the United States. We got to stand up strong. We're showing good results so far from our work. There's been a motion passed in the United States that decries the tariffs being placed on Canada and the annexation threats to our country. And we got to keep going in terms of our push. Now is not the time to stop. It's a bizarre suggestion.
To Katie for a follow-up.
I mean, in the last several weeks, a lot of the measures that the NDP have taken have been, just justified because of what Trump is doing. In removing these tariffs, softening them on Canada, have you lost a foil?
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure that I agree with the Conservatives that the issue has gone away. The president is currently doing a national security investigation into our softwood lumber industry in the province. The goal of that is to put additional punitive tariffs and shut down one of the foundational industries of this province. He has put a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel. We have a massive aluminum smelter in Kitimat, British Columbia. Those workers, their jobs are directly implicated by that. And it's not the biggest part of our economy, but we sell $100 million of auto parts out of British Columbia here that are potentially subject to an up to 25% tariff effective at midnight. Everyone's still, including companies like Stellantis, still trying to figure out what is in and what is out. But we are under attack by the president. And what is required here is ensuring that we're standing up for all of these sectors, all of these workers in our province. And we're going to continue to do that. And the other thing is, if you don't like what President Trump says, you just wait an hour. If you like what he says, maybe wait an hour before holding the victory party.
Next, we have a question from CTV, Rob Buffum.
Hi, Premier. Just wanted to confirm or clarify from your comments. Is it your expectation that softwood lumber will indeed be subject to additional tariffs apart from the 14.5% duties that are going up, that they'll be subject to additional Trump tariffs? And I'm also wondering, does BC need to do more in light of what you've said about we can't be complacent? I assume we're keeping the booze off the shelves, the American alcohol. Do we need to do more?
Yes. The short answer to your second question is yes, we need to do more. We've been working with the business community, with Indigenous leadership and labor leadership. They have identified some key initiatives that they're recommending to us. We are currently undertaking the work around evaluating those for potential implementation. The work that's ahead is harder work. It's about growing our economy. It's about getting rid of those internal trade barriers. It's about getting projects approved and shovels in the ground to ensure that we're able to weather this. It's not as straightforward as taking the Jack Daniels off the liquor store shelf, but we've got to do that work, and we're going to do more. The reasons why I'm anxious about softwood, there's three reasons. One is the president himself has said, we don't need any Canadian lumber. We've got everything we need here. We don't need to buy a single stick of lumber from Canada. The second is he's launched a ludicrous national security investigation into our timber practices here in order to impose additional tariffs under his emergency national security authorities without going to Congress. The third is that Howard Lutnick and the key representative to the president on the trade file has indicated repeatedly that timber, lumber, softwood is a key concern of the president's and an industry that he intends to target. And I take Mr. Lutnick very seriously at that threat. So for multiple reasons, I'm anxious about the sector, which is already reeling from record high tariffs, softwood lumber duties that have been imposed, and the Americans obviously threatening to put even more on. I don't know how you explain that to somebody who's trying to build a renovation or rebuild their home or buy your first home, why you're doing that to the price of lumber in the United States. But for me in British Columbia and Canada, we've got to support that sector and ensure that we're doing all we can to ensure it survives so that it can get to the realization on the American side that they actually do need Canadian lumber and that it helps keep costs down for people. We just got to make it through that period for sanity to prevail.
Follow up with Rob Buffum.
Yeah, just wondering if you can share with us a little bit about what the tone was like at this morning's virtual meeting with the other premiers and Mark Carney including, was there some, I don't know, complimentary comments to Mark Carney? He's been called prime minister, not governor. The tone seems to have shifted significantly in the last few weeks.
Yeah, on the phone call this morning, I congratulated the prime minister. I do think he has succeeded in shifting the tone with the president. I hope it continues, and I encouraged him to be cautious and I'm sure he will be in rolling out the victory banner, and the fact that we've not been hit with as draconian tariffs as some other jurisdictions. I guess the tone on the calls is always uncertainty. We're all waiting for the next tweet. We're waiting for the next announcement, and also concern for the workers that are already seeing the impacts in our provinces and territories, to make sure that the federal government collecting those duties are ensuring that they're delivered effectively to support workers and businesses in response to the American actions.
Next, we have a question from Alec Lazenby, Vancouver Sun.
Hi, Premier. There's been some scrambling around Bill 7 over the past couple days. I know you announced before the House resumed that Section 4 of the bill would be scrapped. There was some confusion around the amendments yesterday on the bill and when they were coming in, how that was going to be handled. And then today we saw the Conservatives scramble around second reading of the bill and not have enough speakers put up to continue speaking to that bill. What are the comments that you have around, first of all, the amendments, how that process was handled, and then second of all, second reading today?
Yeah, I think, for this bill that gives us essential tools to buy BC, to liberalize trade across the country, and to have an additional tool in responding to the American threats that we're facing, I think there's broad support from British Columbians for us to take these actions. The bill passed second reading today. Glad to see it. And it'll go to committee stage, and the Conservatives will be able to ask all the questions they want. But if you've got Conservative MLAs that are advocating that British Columbia become a protectorate of the United States, you can understand why we might be having different opinions about whether or not this bill is needed, about whether or not this bill is the right step. We just have fundamentally different views. I don't believe that British Columbia should become a protectorate of the United States. I believe we should be part of the united country of Canada. And I don't believe that Donald Trump has any justification for these tariffs. And there is never a moment when I wouldn't stand to vote against the actions the president has taken. And yet 5 Conservatives failed to stand against those actions the president has taken. And so I take everything that the Conservatives say with a bit of grain of salt when it comes to this legislation.
Follow up from Alec.
Former BC United MLA Curran Kirkpatrick has registered a new Centre BC party with Elections BC. I was just wondering your comments on that and what that possibly means for provincial politics moving forward.
I wish her the best of luck in terms of her new initiative. The former BC Liberal Party is fracturing into multiple parts these days. I guess we'll see where everything lands.
Next, we have a question. Wolfgang Deppner, Black Press.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. Thank you for my question. Earlier, you said that your government is considering additional initiatives on top of some of the measures already introduced, such as removing the alcohol. How do you plan to bring in those measures? By way of legislation, or assuming passage of Bill 7, will you use Bill 7 to bring in those measures? Thank you.
Thanks, Wolf. So there are some measures in terms of growing our economy and internal trade that if this bill, our tariff response bill, ultimately passes the legislature, that will be brought into force by regulation. The internal trade provisions of the bill enable us to move very quickly, to remove internal trade barriers, to recognize other jurisdictions in Canada that have also recognized our products as being good for them, just like we think their products are good for us. And so we'll be able to move quickly through regulation, but it will still have to come to the legislature at the end, within a year, in order to be made permanent. So we want to be able to act quickly, but we also understand, recognize, and support the idea that those need to be debated by the legislature and ultimately passed into law. And so any other measure other than the toll potentially for vehicles going from Washington State to Alaska would require additional legislative authority. To the best of my knowledge, there may be some kind of action we can take without it, like we did with liquor. We didn't require legislation to do that. But to the best of my knowledge, any additional measures would require some form of legislation.
To Wolf for a follow-up.
Okay, so yes to the use of Bill 7 then. Regarding the interprovincial trade provisions, earlier you talked about those measures being the most aggressive, but Peter Millibar today pointed out a number of loopholes in that legislation, in that aspect of the bill. So how can you reconcile some of your claim as well as the criticism from the opposition? Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Millibar doesn't support the bill. That's his prerogative. I don't understand the conservative position these days on many different issues, but that's not a surprise either. They're a different party. They have different perspectives. But what I can say is the bill does a couple fundamental things. It allows us to recognize, without condition, other provinces' rules around services, around professions, around goods, as good enough for British Columbia. It creates the space for us to say there may be limited exceptions to that recognition. And the best example I can give, and I think it's a good one, is dental hygienists in Alberta can administer anesthesia. They can't in British Columbia. And so for a British Columbian hygienist to go to Alberta, they need to have that additional skill set. We've got requirements like that. There's slight differences between provinces like that where we have to put those exemptions into place. But this is very, in terms of the historic internal trade conversation, it's a very aggressive set of provisions. It doesn't even require that the other like Nova Scotia's bill requires that we recognize Nova Scotia before they'll recognize us. Our bill does not have that kind of provision in it. We can unilaterally recognize another province's standards as good enough for British Columbia, even if they don't recognize our authorities. So we think it's a pretty good provision. He doesn't like it, but they voted against this bill consistently, and they'll have to explain that to their constituents.
We'll now go to the phone lines for our last question and follow-up. We have Chuck Chang, Canadian Press.
Thank you very much, Premier. Even though Canada appears to have dodged the bullet, so to speak, with the latest Trump tariffs, the Prime Minister has mentioned that the tariffs on other countries could fundamentally change the global trading system to the detriment of Canada. I was wondering if you have any insights on whether some of these tariffs on other countries, other markets, may have detrimental knock-on effects on BC, and whether the province is preparing anything to address those concerns.
Yes, the Prime Minister has been clear that he'll be vigilant around the issue of product dumping. And basically what that means is you've got a low-cost jurisdiction that was expecting to sell a bunch of, let's say, tires to the United States. There's tire manufacturing that takes place in some provinces in Canada. All of a sudden, a whole bunch of tires come in from a jurisdiction at cut market prices that destroys the market for Canadian tires. And causes those factories to close. And then once they're closed, the price goes up, and it not only goes up past the original cost for Canadians, but it goes up to an even higher cost that Canadians can't afford. And we don't have any way to respond because we don't have any factories left. So that's why governments at the federal level police dumping. I think that's the great anxiety. A lot of products that were headed for the United States being redirected to Canada. You get a temporarily low price, but then you pay for it down the road. So I know the federal government's engaged on that issue. They're monitoring carefully, and we support them in that.
Final follow-up, Chuck.
Thank you very much. And Premier, again, back to Mr. Manning's editorial. You mentioned the need for a Team Canada approach more than ever. At the same time, this week we've seen Alberta's Premier Daniel Smith write a letter to the Quebec Premier François Legault about possibly pushing for greater provincial autonomy. I was hoping to get your reaction on that, and also whether or not a deeper collaboration in terms of Team Canada is possible with these type of developments happening in the background within provinces. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I don't think there's a premier in Confederation that doesn't look at the deal that Quebec has and think, gosh, that'd be nice. Quebec gets $13 billion in equalization payments from the rest of Canada. They control their own immigration system. They have a special level of consideration from the federal government that the rest of us can only look on and admire. The challenge, I think, for those of us in Western Canada, and I can't speak for Premier Smith, but what I can say for myself is we are, in British Columbia, we're just looking for a fair deal. We're looking for a per capita share. Anything that Quebec or Ontario gets, We just want a per capita share for British Columbians, and we want that same space at the table. I've had reassurances from the Prime Minister that that's front of mind for him. I know that the leader of the Conservative Party federally is committed to that. I know that the leader of the NDP party federally is committed to that. So I'm hopeful that whoever becomes Prime Minister at the end of this election cycle ensures that British Columbia is at the table in a meaningful way, and that our voice is heard. And if the feds want to give us increased autonomy over immigration, we would certainly welcome it because it has not been handled well to date.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.